Right. Good evening and welcome to another 8 p.m. Periscope. And thank you all very much for joining the stream. I am aware of the fact there's always a little time lag, actually. So I sometimes think I'm talking to myself for the first 30 seconds. But anyway, nonetheless, I see you beginning to join. So without further ado, let me bring on my always very special guest, Rebecca Butler. Rebecca, you're welcome to the stream.
Thank you, David. Oh, Jed, not you again. Get away. First, how long have you been waiting, Jed? Were you on at 3 o'clock this afternoon just to make sure you were the first? I bet you were. Hello, everybody.
I suspect Jed's been on all day, but anyway, it's good to see you, Jed, Joseph, Chris, Tony, et al. So as you all join, just the normal sort of housekeeping rules. So suffice to say, if you're on Facebook, share this out. Also, if you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Hit the bell so that you can get notifications for so long as YouTube allow me to be on their channel, of course. Also, if you're in Daily Motion, by the way, which is another video channel some of you may be aware of, I'm on Daily Motion as well now. So I'm spreading the word in all kinds of places. But look, Rebecca, so much has happened since we spoke last, and it was only a week since we spoke last. But you know, I guess it became obvious last week that. And we talked about it in the weeks leading up to last week, that it seemed like Boris was fighting a kind of a rear gun offense on those seeking a complete lockdown. And so here we are, and we're in a complete England is about to fall into a complete 4-week lockdown. So there was a couple of things I wanted to show you just by way of putting it all into context. So here we have the intrepid Boris warning us that the virus deaths are going to be twice as bad as in the spring, apparently, which was interesting. And we had, UK facing double dip recession because of the second national lockdown. And then, Rebecca, as if that wasn't bad enough or good enough, Nigel Farage is to relaunch a Brexit party, calling it the Reform Party, very much on a kind of opposing these lockdown scenarios. So we're going to talk through all these things, I guess. But can we start with your thoughts in terms of the run-up to what seemed to be a hastily arranged press conference on Saturday with Boris, and the sort of the revelation that this is where we're going to be? What did you think about it? What's your thoughts?
Well, I just put a video up about this on Facebook. It's a 4-minute video, and I've reflected on this, and at the time I did think it was a little bit odd what was going on, and I have now decided that I'm going to pin my colours very firmly to the mast and say that what we witnessed on Saturday was Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings sticking the knife into Boris Johnson.
Right.
My evidence for that is it is highly unusual, highly irregular for the government to so hastily summon up a press conference. Mm-hmm. That's unusual. It was due on Monday. They had a meeting with 4 of the ministers. So it was Gove, Gove, Sunak, Hancock, and Johnson. Yeah. And somebody leaked it. Somebody leaked the contents of that meeting on Thursday. So the press then got hold of a lockdown's going to be announced on Monday. And whoever leaked it in order to bounce Boris into giving the press conference on Saturday. And I think that it was a hastily cobbled together announcement. Anybody who's listened to Boris Johnson would have heard him say that he didn't want to press the nuclear option. I honestly think Gove and Cummings have stabbed him in the back. I honestly think it was Gove who protested very loudly that he wasn't the one who had leaked the contents of that meeting. And therefore, I think he did. And of course, don't forget Gove's wife at WAG at Westminster, Sarah Vine, is a journalist. Never forget that. And I think that they did that deliberately so as to push Boris into a decision. The delays, I understand, were because Rishi Sunak threatened to walk out, because Rishi Sunak is a hawk. So he's even more lockdown skeptic than Bojo, who's not very lockdown skeptic, and Gove and Cummings are super lockdown lefties. So they are really into lockdown. And they always have been, they are zealots for lockdown. And Boris was fighting them. Now, remember the positions that Gove holds. He is head of the task force on COVID, number one. He is head of the task force on reforming the civil service. He is Duchy of Lancaster. He is an extremely powerful individual. Dominic Cummings' first job in government was with Gove. They are as tight can be. And so this is why I believe it was shambolic. And I think Boris got bounced into the lockdown. I honestly think Boris wanted a tier 4. I honestly do. And I'm really holding out on my theory here. I really, really want the Boris fans to stay behind Boris, because his approval rating has gone down from 93% to 72%, which is a staggering loss of popularity. And I think that's what Gove was counting on when I think this is a coup against Boris. I really do.
I mean, I think there's a few things there. It was very unusual the way the press conference, it kept being moved forward an hour, right the way through the Six Nations, by the way, which I was trying to watch.
No.
Very annoying from a rugby supporter's point of view, but that was a strange one. And then, I mean, my sense in all of this is that Boris must know that this is destroying his credibility. It absolutely is. And actually, to be honest, whilst I go along with what you say somewhat, I think I felt today, and when I listened to him in the Commons, for example, that we're living in March again. It's all about, we've got to, stay at home, save the and protect the NHS and save lives. And it's like Boris has fallen back to the script that he had back in March. But the world's moved on from March. I think this Conservative Party, as government actually, more precisely, is proving itself, Rebecca, spectacularly incompetent, because Labour, who are in absolute omni-shambles as well, they've gone ahead in the polls. Not that polls matter that much, but I think Boris has fundamentally, he's lost his mojo, if not other things. And who benefits? I don't know. Does Michael Gove still aspire to the crown?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I honestly see this as I honestly see that. I mean, I don't know, right? I am only speculating here, but it feels to me as though Boris is clinging on to power. I really think he's clinging on to power. And he's going to come out strongman-like on the whole Brexit thing this week. He is going to try and regain some of his ground. He has more credibility than Gove, by the way, on Brexit. Yep. Even though Dominic Cummings and Gove were massive in the Vote Leave campaign, Dominic Cummings, of course, famously fell out with Matthew Elliott because he's a complete psychopath. But I think Boris is holding on. Rishi Sunak is the one to watch here, because I don't know if you noticed this, but Rishi Sunak tweeted immediately after the conference, "This is not an economic decision. This is purely a health decision." And I think Rishi Sunak was supporting Boris to the extent that we shouldn't have another national lockdown. Why would you shut down Cornwall when it's Manchester who's got the cases? Why would you shut rural Britain up, England up? Why would you shut the rural areas when it's the cosmopolitan, the metropolitan areas that had the problem? Because obviously, the way I view it, high rate of infections in 18 to 30-year-olds, they've had it. They've had their own little epidemic curve. They've had their own Goldberg club. They've gone woo up and they've come down exactly the same shape as the rest of the country earlier this year.
Yeah. I think Rebecca needs to also unmute herself once she's recovered. Well, whilst Rebecca is temporarily incapacitated, and I presume she can hear me, and she's got very emotional about this. Listen, Rebecca, one of the strange things is, and this is where, remember, unmute your microphone. Yes, you're back. Yeah, the thing about, I think Boris was kind of pushed into this in some way, but the line that's been spun is that when he saw the figures, the graphs, as I say, we're both playing our hashtag game. When he saw the graph and he saw 4,000 deaths a day, he just couldn't take a risk with that. And I've actually got in front of me here the different predictions from the different, so as you know, Public Health England, Cambridge, were forecasting 4,000 deaths a day, which is an interesting forecast, Rebecca, because at the peak of the epidemic back in March, the daily global deaths figure was 8,500. So it's kind of interesting to think that the UK would actually have, at this point, all these months later, half the global deaths with all the additional things we know. That's interesting. I think the 4,000 figure.
It wasn't predicted deaths, was it? It was the reasonable worst case scenario.
Well, it was from Public Health England, yeah. But if I look at Imperial College, they were coming out with 2,000 deaths. London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, they were round about the just under 2,000. And Sage, interestingly, had the Sage worst case is way below all these other models. So what seems to have happened is, and I'm really interested in your response to this one. So, you know, I certainly don't have issues with, I do have issues with Sage, but Sage had their numbers, their worst case scenario numbers, and okay, they are what they are. But all these other models have just suddenly appeared over the last couple of weeks, and they're all pretty much apocalyptic. And I suppose if you're a prime minister and you look at those, and if you believe them, what are you going to do, Rebecca? Are you going to ignore them, or are you going to act? Thoughts?
Well, you're going to act, but this is where, this is where politicians are wholly reliant on science. Now, science is a consensus view, and the consensus is not established at all. There are voices on so many different fronts. Sorry, I might have to mute my mic again.
No problem.
So the science isn't settled on the forecasting.
Yeah.
And the reasonable worst case scenario does not mean the worst case scenario is going to arise. But you do have to plan for the worst case scenario with the health service. But you plan based on today's numbers.
Yeah.
You plan based on a projection. But you know what I think is what Johnson should have done is Johnson should have apologized. I think he should have turned around and said, I'm really, really sorry. I accept we've made mistakes. Because Macron did this last week. Macron said, I have made mistakes, and I say to you, the French people, I am sorry for what I have done and for the mistakes I've taken. Macron sits there on his own. He's not surrounded by graphs and scientists who nobody bloody understands. He sits there and he takes the rap himself. I mean, he didn't mean it, but he still has this appearance of humility, which goes down really, really well. Boris doesn't do that. Boris just says, oh, I'm just doing what those guys tell me to do. I'm following the science. But they're not following the science. I mean, I have a reasonable grip on maths. I have a very good grip on medical statistics. I couldn't find an x-axis and a y-axis on those graphs that had any consistency. Or what was the source of the data? Had they agglomerated all the data and put it in the graph? It was just it was like somebody had taken a plate of scrambled egg and thrown it into a ceiling fan. The way that day came out, it was horrendous. It was agonizingly awful. The way they presented the data, they needed to put one graph up, nothing else, not 8 or 6 or whatever it was. It was so bad, so badly positioned. If Boris had said, look, the previous lockdown, unfortunately, people stayed away from the health service. So now there is a backlog of cancer cases that need operating on. Okay, now that's our fault. We encourage you to stay away from the NHS. We told you that it was a COVID health service. You stayed away. A lot of you are now ill. A lot of you now need that surgery. And some of you will need ITU after your surgery. He'd said that, I think people would have swallowed it. Because, you see, I don't think people really understand what a COVID patient does to an ITU, because they create havoc. They need to be separately nursed with separate staff in a separate area. So the infrastructure issues around nursing COVID patients are no mean feat. It is a problem.
Yeah.
They have to designate areas of the hospital that are COVID positive, COVID unknown, and COVID negative. They have to split the hospitals up. So hospital capacity is down anyway. So if you're going to keep treating people for heart attacks, aneurysms, the big surgery, the planned surgery, you're going to have to calculate in capacity for them, because those people who miss their surgery really need it now. And they can't be nursed next to a COVID positive patient. And by the way, in a influenza outbreak, they are nursed next door to each other. There are not isolation units. People with influenza in hospital are not treated separately. They are treated in the same wards. They're not isolated. The nurses don't wear PPE. None of that happens with influenza.
But Rebecca, one of the questions I have, and I wanted to ask you this, and it relates to, I saw this news item today in relation to 2 hospitals here in Northern Ireland, and the Department of Health put out a statement saying that, now this has confused me, both the acute wards were full of COVID patients, with COVID patients, and this was kind of being used as a justification for the lockdown we're under. But hang on a second. So am I being told that there's nobody else with no other illness in any intensive care ward in any of these major hospitals? I find that really, really odd. Would it operate like that? I mean, people have conditions that they have to go into intensive care. Forget about COVID. There's other things happen to folks. So I find that implausible. I mean, I know maybe you can't speak about that specific, but in the generality, what's your, because you know about this, Rebecca, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, people have stayed at home and died. So for example, so a classic example would be somebody who has what's called an aortic aneurysm. in normal days, they would get extreme pain, maybe speak to their GP, get rushed into hospital and have surgery, and definitely go on to ITU afterwards. That's like almost a slam dunk, going into ITU after aneurysm surgery. Now, that same person wouldn't have gone in and would have died at home. So what would have been a ITU bed 6 months ago, they actually died at home. So they will be lost in the numbers of people who died at home. Yeah. And by the way, if they had tested positive on a PCR test for COVID, if they had tested positive
in a PCR death,
they would be a COVID death just by
And I mean, that's one of the things that annoys me most. There was another case here, again in Northern Ireland. I'm being very parochial tonight, but it's kind of relevant. There was a young man, a 19-year-old fellow, and he died. And the media here sold it to us last week as Northern Ireland's youngest COVID death. Within 6 hours, they had to retract that because the father of the young man went on TV and he said he was very upset at the loss of his son, but his son died from heart failure. He had congenital heart problems. He died, his father said this, my son died from heart failure. He did not die from COVID. And then the media did a quick reach. But having said that, they got the message out earlier in the day. It just shows you COVID can get you if you're 19. Yeah, it could theoretically, but a minuscule probability. So, I mean, that's a sort of, I don't know if that's, it's the media who I detest with such a vengeance. Yet again, using something like that to flog a particular narrative, even though the father of the deceased young man was telling them it's nothing to do with COVID. So to your point, if you died of an aortic aneurysm, then but you have COVID, you're COVID. And isn't that a problem? This whole business about the figures are all about anyone who's died in the last 28 days where COVID's mentioned on the death certificate. How medically valid is that, Rebecca?
Well, it is medically valid when you will, because it's a notifiable disease. So it will have some validity, in fact, to see what the short, medium, and long-term mortality is of the disease itself. So you might want to know, for example, how many people die of a heart attack within the 28 days after COVID. The government did change it down to 28 days because it was 3 months originally. And there are some anecdotal stories of people otherwise fit and well. There's one of a Muslim doctor, consultant who's 53, working fully fit and healthy. I think he was a surgeon. He got COVID and died 28 days after he got discharged from hospital. He died from a heart attack. So for health monitoring and long COVID, not understanding the full force of the disease, there is validity in doing that. And I don't criticize doing it. What I do criticize, though, is the fact that that test could be a false positive.
Yes.
So I'm not talking about somebody who's died from coronavirus and then dies from a side effect from coronavirus. I'm talking about the person who could even test positive on a PCR test on death and be marked down as died with COVID, not from, but with. So died in a road accident. They got tested to protect the staff, and they got tested and they were PCR positive. PCR is not designed for this. PCR is not designed for this virus. The very man who designed PCR has said it is not designed for coronavirus. So
but I think, Rebecca, this cuts to the heart of the whole. Many of us want to have the proper statistics, to understand the proper science behind it. But when you've got a government that seems to run away from the whole issue of false positives, I mean, for a week or two, that was all over the news. And then it just went quiet. And it's like every positive PCR test equals infection. And of course, we both know, and the people watching this know, it doesn't. Far from it. But at least if they shared the stats, if each and every one of us could make our mind up. But we can't even do that with the way these figures are being fiddled. And by the way, the 4,000 case number, which referenced Boris's big meltdown, apparently, was based on apparently amazing, maybe not that amazingly, Public Health England and Cambridge University were allegedly using a 60-day period. Any cause of over the 60 days, any reference to coronavirus in the death certificate. So I don't know. I just think there's, I mean, I put follow the science down sarcastically in this one, because I don't see anyone following. Science shouldn't be followed anyway, because it's not, that's not the nature of science. We understand that. But
it's not settled. The science is not settled. And they should actually be brave enough with their majority to say, we messed up, we've now changed our minds. And actually, Boris should have said, not so much we may extend the 2nd of December lockdown, which is what all the briefing was today. He should have been saying, we're reviewing the numbers every day, so we may shorten it. That's what he should have said.
He should have. Well, you should be his advisor, because he did well, to be fair to Boris, and this actually goes to your initial theory, wasn't it Michael Gove yesterday who went on the Sunday politics shows and suggested that, well, 2nd of December is aspirational, but of course, yes, we could extend it beyond that. So in effect, does this go to your theory? Michael Gove's burying Boris, isn't it?
Yeah. Sarah Vine is the one to watch. Honestly, Westminster Wag on Twitter, guys, keep an eye on her. Really keep an eye on her. She is where you get I get my ideas from, is the bile that comes out of her mouth. I mean, today, justifying MPs getting a £3,000 pay rise. Oh my God. Oh my God. They are so out of touch. Just say, no, I don't want mine, thank you very much. Put it back into the taxpayer's pocket. Don't bloody... and she's justifying it. So I had a spat with her. I said, would you like to tell me exactly what an MP does for work? Because she was saying they've all been working during COVID. And I'm like, what do MPs actually do? I mean, really think this one. What do they do? What do they do? Nothing. Nothing.
Well, they hold surgeries, don't they? They hold their ever so important surgeries, except
citizens' advice. That's what they do. They say, go to the Citizens Advice Bureau, go to the housing office. My Cocker Spaniel could do that. Really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, on a serious note, and it's a good point, Rebecca, that you make. At a time when, let's face it, right now in England, right this moment, lots of small businesses, hairdressers, one-man bands, all those people, in restaurants, hospitality, all that, they're facing a month of bleakness. Certainly with a 20% pay cut at best case scenario for them, and that's the month before Christmas. And the MPs, at the same time, with, as you say, no sense of self-awareness of anything, pocket, trouser, an extra 3,000 quid. I mean, what does that say about the detachment between the political class and just ordinary people?
Yeah, but look at the detachment between clinical practicing doctors and Whitty and Vance.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody posted yesterday on Twitter, I think it was Alison Pearson from The Telegraph, and she'd put up something about Ron Daniels, who's one of my buddies. He's an intensivist from Birmingham, and she quoted him. And my response to it was, nah, you wouldn't listen to a doctor who doesn't sit at an office all day, because that is what we have been reduced to now, is taking our clinical advice, somebody who hasn't been near a patient in years. And they're on public service salaries, by the way, and they're extremely well paid. So they don't suffer the consequences of what we're going through. Gove doesn't suffer the consequences. Cummings doesn't suffer the consequences. But Rishi Sunak does seem to understand it. Rishi Sunak, I think, has got his finger on the pulse. And I know some people don't agree with me. I still believe that Boris does. I think he's being a fanny about it. And I think he's more worried about polling than he should be. But I do think that really the bad guys here are Gove and Cummings. I really do. They're way too powerful.
Well, and what's your thoughts on? I mean, we've talked about Matt Hancock, the health secretary, before, but he was in the meeting, wasn't he? He was in the briefing meeting, so he could be the leak as well. Because again, I don't know if you saw it, but Mr. Speaker in the Commons today, before Boris got to speak, Mr. Speaker got to speak, and he was very cross about the fact that the disrespect that had been shown towards our Parliament by one of those people. Because it has to be one of those people. And I wonder, do you think Matt could have been the guy, or do you think it was a Gove Cummings scenario?
I don't think it was Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, agreed. He seems to be the one guy who, maybe because he understands the consequences, Rebecca, because they will land with him. Eventually, he picks up the bill. So he seems to be the most reluctant to go down this awful route that Boris seems, for whatever reason, he's going to take us, I just thought to myself, it's really strange to have the Prime Minister being admonished by the Speaker of the House of Commons over something which,
6 weeks ago, exactly the same thing happened. This is the second time that Lindsay has had a pop at the Prime Minister. Yeah, absolutely.
He's a very good speaker, Rebecca. He seems to be very impartial. Yeah, really, I really like it. But I guess, I mean, the consequences of this are interesting. So we are where we are. So from Thursday, England, to a significant degree, closes down. I think the only things that stay open are schools and what else, Rebecca? What's staying open? Schools are staying open. Not sure.
Construction sites.
Yeah, construction sites, and obviously essential business and the major retailers, the major food retailers stay open. But most other people, I think, are probably going to be put in cold storage for the rest of the month of November. So that's going to cause. As that little headline I stuck up at the beginning showed, it's going to cause economic damage. Rishi Sunak very fairly pointed this out. He seems to be, he's certainly much more sensitive to the consequences for ordinary people than Boris is. But there's the other consequence, and that's what I want to move on to talk about now. The other consequence is a lot of people are pretty miffed with Boris and his Conservative government. Enter, stage left, Nigel Farage. Although actually, as we speak, interestingly, Nigel Farage, he's Donald Trump, about 7:30 tonight, UK time, landed in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And yes, Donald Trump landed right in Joe Biden's
territory.
Territory. And who's there to meet him? Yes, Nigel Farage. So brilliant. Interesting.
Yeah.
Little thing.
He was in... where was he the other day? Was it Phoenix? Nigel Farage turned up for him.
Yes, and was on stage.
Yeah, he was really good. He was brilliant. But yeah.
Although I thought it was funny. I tell you, I thought I would think about that as Trump was there in his kind of with a MAGA hat on and whatnot, and the Americans being what they were. And along comes Nigel in that sort of suit that he always wears. He's very much the Englishman abroad, and fair enough to him. But he's dapper, isn't he? Yeah, but the thing is, and this is where I think it gets interesting, there's clearly dissatisfaction, even within Conservative ranks, with the strategy that let's not personalize it. The strategy that government's taking, there's dissatisfaction for definite, and there'll be some kind of mini rebellion on Wednesday. It'll not be that significant, but there'll be some. I don't think they've been able to buy off everybody yet, although Steve Baker seemed to be very happy when he left Westminster the other day. Wonder why. So obviously Farage has seen there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity to speak to the British people using this changing the Brexit party to the Reform Party, and fundamentally, at any rate, majoring on like, we have to learn to live with COVID. We have the Barrington Declaration. We've got other options that don't involve what we're just about to go through. Do you think that will have any significance? And if so, in what way?
Well, being the cynical old cow that I am minded to remind people that Nigel Farage was critical of the herd immunity strategy right at the beginning. So he's changed his tune. He is a political opportunist, but even though I said that, I am delighted that we now have a formal anti-lockdown party. I rather suspect, and I hope I'm wrong, I rather suspect that by the time the party is up and running and registered with the Electoral Commission, I will be, I hope, out of this lockdown. But and I hope this will be the last lockdown, largely because public opinion can spin on a sixpence. Now, this Reform Party could be the catalyst to spin the narrative against Boris. They are so obsessed with polling. They really are more obsessed with polling than anything else. I know this a little bit from my involvement as a candidate for the Conservatives. They are so careful what they say. Where I'm not, and they're very uptight about the people's perception. And it doesn't matter how many times you say to professional politicians, you're talking rubbish, because the electorate likes plain talking honesty. They don't like political doublespeak. But unfortunately, Nigel will hit the polling, and that will be the game changer. So it's which Tory is the most agile and able to flick. So we now have a power play between Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, and Nigel Farage. They are idiots for not putting him in the House of Lords. They are idiots for not doing that. A lot of people wanted a peerage for Farage. If they'd done it, they could have sent him over to Washington as the UK ambassador to Washington, get him out, because he is dangerous for the Tories. He really is dangerous. Coming up to the local elections, he is massively dangerous. So honestly, this whole thing could spin. And the fact he's not registered, by the way, doesn't mean that people aren't going to join the Reform Party.
Oh, no. Farage is a master of opportunism. We both accept, we both think that, I think. But there's nothing wrong with opportunism if it's kind of relevant. And I think, Rebecca, you make the good point also that we really haven't had any opposition to the policies that have been implemented upon us over the past 9-10 months or whatever. Labour, absolutely hopeless. Lib Dems, well, no need. I mean, they're irrelevant. So there's been no opposition, and now with Nigel Farage, I believe there will be a credible opposition, I think, which will panic Boris, because, as you say, those local council elections are coming.
Yeah, but the Lib Dems are not irrelevant in local council elections. They are highly relevant. That's the only place they have any strength is in local politics. So any of those Lib Dem Tory marginals, the last thing they need is the Reform Party eroding the Tory vote, just as the Brexit Party eroded the Tory vote 18 months ago. So this is a big problem for the local elections, a really big problem for the local elections.
And can I ask, do you think, with the local elections in mind, here's a scenario that I think is possible, but maybe not probable. So we're going to be in lockdown until the early December. Boris has said that all things being equal, after that, it won't be so bad. We're back into the tier system, Well, if that means that depending on what the R rate is in your area on the 3rd of December, my wedding anniversary, on the 3rd of December, if you're tier 3, I mean, frankly, it's still not going to be, it's not happy Christmas to you. So, and then when we get into January, because respiratory illnesses do peak in those winter months, it is, I put it to you, Rebecca, possible that there might, based on our rate, have to be another lockdown. Now, if there was another lockdown in let's say January, February, any time in that slot, do you think the Conservative Party candidates in local elections could survive that with the threat that you've mentioned, the Lib Dems and Labour do constitute? Is that survivable?
No.
Yeah,
absolutely not. I mean, let's be fair. No Western politician has done well with COVID. The closest thing to Western that isn't Western is Modi, and he has now officially stopped testing people for COVID because the numbers were getting too high. Yeah. We don't believe China's numbers for a minute. I do believe there was some inherent SARS-CoV-1 immunity. I've always said this, which is why it looked as though Southeast Asia did better. Sweden's done okay, but not brilliantly. It's really still, it's not a shining example of anything. It's far too early to tell. I think what Boris has to do, I think Boris has to turn the narrative away from positive cases, because the cat's out of the bag on PCR testing. Have to turn the narrative away from the R number, because the R number is relevant. Because it is relative. It's relative. So where I am, if there's one case today and 2 tomorrow, the R rate's high, okay? But there's only one case. I have 1 case today, 3 next week. It's 1.52. It's all relative to when you take your base position and how many you had in your base position in the first place. Yeah. So again, if Boris moves the narrative away from R rate and away from positive cases, and he takes the narrative into how many hospital beds have we got with COVID patients in, what are their ages, and what is the ITU bed occupancy, again, for COVID, and what are their ages, I think he will do better out of this, because PCR testing is discredited. Our numbers are really quite meaningless. They really are. He needs to change the narrative back onto the NHS. That I really, really think that.
Well, that's interesting, Rebecca, because I listened to Boris, and he's very much obsessed on the R rate. But even then, like so many politicians, he doesn't demonstrate a real understanding of the essence of the R rate. He said in the Commons that the R rate was just over 1, but it needed to go below that, blah, blah, blah. And then about 2 sentences later, he referenced the fact that the most recent ONS study had it at 1.6. Well, hang on a second, Boris. What is it? You just increased it by 50%. And anyway, I mean, a generic R rate means nothing, as you say. I mean, what's when you take the country and sort of cobble it together in the way that it does, I think this is a suicidal strategy going along the R rate. So I agree with you in that one.
Because the R rate for this coronavirus is 3. That's really, really high. I mean, the R rate for normal influenza is less than 2. So an R rate of 3 unchecked, so no social distancing, no hand washing, nothing, I would infect 1,000 people in a month with an R rate of 3. But an R rate of 1 or hovering 1 that's good enough, that really is good enough, because they're not that bothered about an R rate of 2 for influenza. They don't demand that all the nurses have their flu jabs. So our rate of 1.2 isn't bad. It's still growing, but another word they love is exponential. They've turned the word
We love that.
exponential
Yeah.
into a Hammer House horror film. Oh, it's exponential. Well, anything that increases up a graph is exponential. It's how steep is important to know. So again, our number, just shut up about it. Shut up about it. It's a relative term. Shut up about cases. The bunny's out of the bag on that one. Talk about bed capacity.
But where I think Boris is going to actually really destroy himself, in addition to everything we've said, is he wants to crank up the number of tests to, what is it, 1 million a day, Rebecca, or an absolutely huge number of tests. So if you're testing all those people, you're going to get your exponential increase in so-called cases, and that's going to suggest that your R rate's still rising, and round we go. So the obsession, and I don't know about you, but I think this obsession on testing, getting everybody tested, twice a day, it's madness.
Well, yeah, because what are they going to do with a positive test? Most people are going to ignore it. By the way, I said back in March that this was not amenable to contact tracing because the lag between catching, shedding, and getting symptoms, plus the risk of asymptomatic carriers, all those factors together would not lend this virus to contact tracing, because you've already blown it out. You've already given it to people, just like a common cold, before you even know you've got it. So, and I refer back to my experience of contact tracing during the AIDS epidemic, when we used to either ring people up or get them in and speak to them and say, how many people have you slept with? That is so much easier as a contact trace. Or, even Ebola, even though it is a massively violent, horrible pathogen, at least with Ebola, you could contact trace, and that's basically how they did deal with it in the most recent outbreak. But coronavirus is just so slippery and quick that contact tracing doesn't work. Now, here in France, because I'm in France at the moment, here in France, nobody signed up for their app. They've got a test and trace app. Nobody signed up for it. And to get a PCR test, a GP needs to prescribe it. So you can't even ring up and get one. You've got to get it prescribed for you. So, here in France, the uptake is very poor, but their cases per million are slightly less than ours. But Macron's taken an absolute batting over coronavirus here. But 5-year mortality, the numbers aren't really that high.
I mean, can I just ask the people on the stream here, just answer me this. How many of you have downloaded the NHS Track and Trace app? Hands up. I haven't, and I won't be downloading the NHS Track and Trace app. That's my personal choice. I leave it open to you. Yes or no will do. Rebecca and I will be able to see what the up.
Nope. You see, I have.
I know you have. I know.
I have. But because I'm on the King's study, the COVID-19 study, I've had symptoms a couple of times over the course of this year, and I've been selected to have the PCR test. So that's why I've got the NHS app. But it is slightly worrying. And of course, the French, who are so obsessed with their liberties, they just will not have it. They are so suspicious of government here that they won't download the app. So I think only 2 million people in France have downloaded the app, which is shockingly poor uptake.
That's 2 million.
But their deaths aren't any worse because of it, And, the market was open today. This country's in lockdown, and the open air market in the local town was open. People were circulating, albeit with masks, in the open air mask market, because that's the rule. You don't have to wear masks out in the open, but you do have to wear them in the market. The market was running. And because I think Macron recognises that French taxation system is maxed out to the full. They literally can't tax people another penny more, because the number of compliant people is much lower than Britain. Many people here don't pay their taxes. They just take cash on market stalls, for example. So he'll risk putting them into poverty, extreme poverty, if he doesn't let them sell their wares on a market stall. So the lockdown here is light, very light. But Macron's really under the cosh. The Italians are protesting, the Spanish are protesting. And I think the British government is one of the most generous at furlough and bailing people out, put universal credit up, not giving children free school meals. The British government has been the most generous, really, of all the Western nations, more generous than the Americans as well. So I'm slow to criticize, because I do recognize, as I posted on Twitter this evening, China is getting away scot-free with this one now.
And actually, you are right, Rebecca. Throughout all of this, the media in particular has chosen to willfully ignore what China did. This virus came from Wuhan. This originated in China. China carries huge culpability. We can certainly look to their individual governments and how they've responded and what they've done, but we should never lose track of the fact that China is the only economy in the world which is flourishing at the moment. And as you said in your video, which I watched, Rebecca, they're continuing with their plans, full steam ahead. Meanwhile, our economies are, to different degrees, in serious trouble. The best performing G7 economy is the US, by the way, under President Trump, which is only back minus 3.5. I think France is back about minus 9% GDP. Germany round about the same. So you raise a point. China's got away with this one, haven't they?
China is getting away with it scot-free, and meanwhile they are putting military bases in Africa. I mean, why aren't people absolutely panicking about this? It is a major problem. And interestingly, I only found this out this evening. I got a response to my tweet, and it went, "Yep, absolutely right," and words to that effect. And I looked to see who it was, and it's an ex-MOD spook. So I thought, well, if a spook's agreed with me, then I must be onto something here. That why the hell? Who's the Chinese People Liberation Army anyway? Like, who are they liberating themselves from? I find it all very, very worrying. And actually, one world leader has stood up. Trump has stood up, and he has spoken truth. He's spoken quite rightly about what China's done. And he's saying, look, we must actually fight this virus. We mustn't succumb to it. That's all he's ever really said in his bumbling, doesn't really get the words out right sort of way. He's not said this isn't a dangerous virus. He said, don't be afraid of it. I've had it. I've survived. I'm the normal recovery from COVID. Don't be frightened. Don't be frightened. Because the Washington Post did that fantastic expose on how Chinese bots trolled the West on the images from Israel and how it encouraged lockdowns, because they showed Wuhan going into lockdown and then, well, hey, we've cleared the virus completely, and that's what you need to do. And then meanwhile, China is reaping all the benefits of us locking down. The Hang Seng and the Nikkei have just shot up in this crisis. So
it is a strange coincidence that back in January, February, the US economy was absolutely roaring. Unemployment was at an all-time low. African American employment was at an all-time high. Hispanic employment at an all-time high. Boom, COVID hit, and America goes down. The Democrats blame Trump, and hence you talk about Trump bumbling speeching. I mean, you've heard Joe Biden. I mean, if Joe's able to get one sentence out coherently, that's a victory. And yet that could be the president of the United States in 48 hours' time. And China, I think, would be very happy about that. Trump said something that I would have loved Boris to have said. We got to learn to live with COVID. Yes, let's protect the vulnerable. Yes, let's take measures to ensure that all of the health service is protected where it needs to be. But let most people under the age of 60 get on with the rest of their lives. Let business get on with what it can. Otherwise, you stop being a functioning economy, Rebecca. And the UK, I mean, I think the UK government was, in law, I understand, couldn't borrow more than 11 billion. And then they changed the legislation back in March. It's over 200 billion. This is unbelievable, spaffing against the wall, isn't it? And
Yeah.
that's why I think Rishi, to be fair to him, he kind of gets it. But it's like Boris doesn't seem to either get it, or else he's so besieged by other stuff, he just plows on.
Well, he's steering a middle line, but unfortunately, the reasonable position isn't in the middle because one side is so extreme and right off the page. So he's got Rishi here, and then the other lot are miles off. So he's drawn a middle point between batshit crazy and Rishi Sunak. He's got to really drag, and this is why I say stop talking about our numbers, stop talking about positive results, start talking about what the hospital capacity is. It really is important. Now, my daughter's a junior doctor, and she's on nights at the moment, and she said, Mum, the hospital is really, really busy. We are full. So they are having problems, but that is because they've had to sequester the COVID patients off from the others. They've basically almost used double the normal capacity just to accommodate the COVID patients, which does make it full. You can't do it any other way because we already have 25% of new cases are contracted in hospital. So we cannot have people not going into hospital again. I get the problem, but we do have Nightingale hospitals. We should be using Nightingale hospitals. I'm really, 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 really sorry. But if your relative is taken a long, long way from you because Harrogate or Manchester or Glasgow or Birmingham or London, a long way from you, I'm sorry, but it's tough. You're not going to be near your relative, but the only way to save the NHS for the other people who need it is to use the Nightingale hospitals. But it's
I agree.
An issue. We have a major staffing issue. Now they've decided not to ventilate everybody. CPAP is doable by nurses with less training than ITU nurses, but nevertheless, you do need the expertise there. That's fine. Utilize that. Utilize the Nightingale capacity. So anyway, these are all just thoughts, and thank God I don't have to make these decisions because God help them all. It really is tough for all of them. Every single world leader, it is damn tough right now.
Yeah, well, it is, and you wouldn't necessarily want to be in their shoes. Although I wouldn't mind being U.S. president. It has to be said, Rebecca. Things would be different. But Trump, at any rate, is trying to try and normalize it. I mean, if Biden gets in, he said he's going to, mask wearing for 3 months. The U.S. economy is shut down for 3 months. Anybody with a brain understands that if you close the American economy for 3 months, if he got in, and I don't believe he will, but if he did, if America catches the cold, we will most certainly catch the flu, because you can't do that to the world's #1 economy without severe consequences, But I'll tell you, actually, time is always our enemy, Rebecca. But I wanted to just goes too quick.
I just want to comment here, if I may, on Billy Piper's teeth. I have been keeping an eye on all the things you're saying and taking note. absolutely agree with you here, where you're talking about baseline data, and it's at the fundamentals need to be established, and also there needs to be consistency across all of the different reporting methods that there are. We need a consistent way of looking at things and comparing the data that different people collect in different ways, because the ONS does one, PHE does one, King's does one, Imperial does one, Cambridge does one, Oxford does one. And this is why I said it was like scrambled eggs being thrown into a ceiling fan the other day when we were just confronted with all those graphs. I don't know what Billy Piper would think, that, you know, there was just so much data and none of it really was coherent to me anyway. So I'll be very interested to see what the comment is about that. But thank you. I had been reading your comments.
Yes, thank you, Billy Piper's teeth, for not least for the novel name. Actually, Rebecca, in the Commons this afternoon, Sir Graham Brady, former chairman of the 1922 committee, he seems to be a bit of on the rebellious side, and he asked the Prime Minister, can the Prime Minister provide the data, the basis for the data? Which, so this is the same point we're really all making here. You know, okay, if you want us to accept this data, please provide the full context and all the relevancies around the data. And I think this is where I detect real unease amongst the backbenchers anyway. And actually, Sir Graham he's pretty noteworthy within the Tory ranks anyway, that they feel that it's uncomfortable because we're rushing into this. The data does seem to be inconsistent, and that just raises heckles, doesn't it?
Well, I couldn't even read the x-axis on the graphs. I mean, the BBC banners across the bottom. So, you know, I know not everybody wants to read the x-axis on a graph, and most people wouldn't know what an x-axis is. But, you know, it doesn't matter. If you are presenting data and you are taking people's liberties away based on that data, the very least, your duty as servants, public servants, your minimum duty is to be open and honest. I'm not suggesting they're dishonest. I'm suggesting they couldn't give a damn what the x-axis says because they've made their minds up anyway, and in their minds we're all too thick to understand it. So, well, you know,
yeah, I also think they don't really.
I know your point was about Graham Brady, and thank God for him and Desmond Swain, and there are 80 MPs, Steve Baker included, who I am told are going to vote against on Wednesday. I bet they bloody don't, frankly, because I can see them just being whipped into submission or being offered something. You know, they'll get some shares in AstraZeneca, I suspect, if they vote with the government. So, but it's nice to see that some MPs are listening. But, you know, for what it's worth, the government will still pass the legislation. But how lovely would it be? How wonderful would it be if we saw the government lose on Wednesday? It would just be the best thing ever.
It would be the best thing ever, but Labour will make sure that they don't. Labour will prop up Boris if necessary, and that's why, to my mind, it's this one will shoot through the Commons, and Boris will unfortunately get another, you know, economic demolishing lockdown for England. And the interesting thing then, Rebecca, is what does Sturgeon do in Scotland? Does she go for lockdown plus? What's Wales going to do? I mean, I thought the Welsh were
Northern Ireland. I mean, when I came to see you in August, you were still in lockdown then. I mean, you barely emerged from your chrysalis. They got slammed back in
again. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And, I mean, Wales is. I'm watching on the news tonight. Wales is coming out of their lockdown, and now they're talking about stopping people going into Wales from England. I mean, are they going to build a Trump wall between now and Friday? Ludicrous. Scotland. Oh, joy of joys. What is Scotland going to do? It's going to have it's already got 5 tiers. It will probably have 12, one for each town. I don't know what Scotland's going to do. I mean, Sturgeon is loving this because this is anti-English sentiment
100%. Yeah.
max. And
Yeah.
again, she said it. Don't go to England. English people are not welcome to cross the border.
I saw that. Yeah.
Said it.
That's the worst thing about this, and it's arguably the worst thing about the devolution settlement. It's meant that the toxic SNP up in Scotland and Welsh Labour, Plaid Cymru in Wales, it's brought out the worst of these petty nationalists. So, and actually against English people, they don't seem to understand that it wasn't for your taxes, Rebecca, and others in England, which via Barnett, I mean, let's face it, the regions do very well. They couldn't afford most of the things that they do anyway. And yet Sturgeon wants to basically stop English people travel as if you had the plague, which is laughable. And the same in Wales. I find that really upsetting, actually. As a unionist, I find it upsetting to see the parts of the union tearing because of the likes of Cranky up in Scotland and Drakeford, who's just low IQ cretin.
He's again another one who stands in my list of people with the charisma of a dead rabbit. He's just up there with social workers and undertakers, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the Matrix says it's hard to work out who to despise the most. We are spoilt. Well, we are indeed spoilt, but listen, folks, we've been overly spoilt by Rebecca's presence, and I am conscious of time. So, listen, I think, Rebecca, we're going to wrap up now. But before we go, as I said, there is a big election happening tomorrow across the pond. What's your forecast?
I'm really struggling with this because it's not what I want. It's head over heart. I really want Trump to win. I think he could sneak it. I think on the day he could get the electorate out. But they're saying that the Republicans don't benefit from voter turnout, but I'm not sure I agree with that. I think everybody benefits from voter turnout. Actually, I think democracy benefits from turnout. If Biden wins on the day, America's in for a lot of trouble because the postal votes are going to be challenged in the Supreme Court by Trump because Biden is only president-elect. He is not the president until January. And I think we could see a Supreme Court challenge to postal voting. So there will be a huge amount of uncertainty. If you have any equities on the US stock market, cash in now, because I think the stock market could be hammered if Biden wins on the day, because Trump is not going to let this one go. If Trump wins on the day, what's Biden going to do? Biden's going to wait for the postal ballots to be counted.
Yeah,
I want Trump to win, by the way. I do want Trump to win. I think he's far superior on all of the things that I hold dear. I'm really, I know you're a fan.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will have my so listen, folks. I will be back on Wednesday with a US presidential special on the Open Dialogues channel, which I'm also presenting on. I've got a couple of Trump advisors on with me. We're hoping it's going to be a celebration. If it's not, it's going to be a very long hour. But I'm hoping Trump does prevail. I don't believe a word of the polls. I don't believe the trash media, the scum media. I don't believe them. And we'll see. But, the people speak. There's still a lot of them haven't voted. They're going to vote tomorrow. And we will then sit back and watch. So it's quite exciting. But anyway, folks, that's for Wednesday. I wanted to thank Rebecca very much for taking the time out to be with us again this Monday evening. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank all of you, all of those who have joined the stream, and thank all of those who watch this on replay as well, because I know there's loads of you. And so, with that, it's adieu from me,
and is bonsoir from me.